The wedding was unforgettable, full of joy and happiness, but a few weeks passed after the honeymoon, and life gradually began to return to normal. Keisha and Marcus found themselves facing a reality that no longer looked as romantic as the first days after their wedding. Now they had to build their new life together, not just to enjoy each other, but also to solve everyday tasks and everyday problems. At first, everything seemed wonderful. They both believed that love could overcome any difficulties. Every morning they woke up in each other's arms, smiling at the new day. Marcus went to his new job, returned home thinking about how they would spend the evening together. Keisha continued to work for the charity, putting all her efforts into helping those in need. However, gradually in understanding came love is not only passion, kisses at sunset, and perfect days, but also the ability to cope with routine. Expectations and reality began to collide, creating small cracks in their seemingly flawless relationship. The first problem was space. Marcus had moved into Keisha's apartment, and now every corner of her cozy, orderly home was filled with his belongings. She used to enjoy cleanliness and order. She had her own little place where she could relax after a long day. Now it seemed to her that everything had become cramped. Marcus's things were lying where they had been in perfect order before. It took Marcus a moment to realize that this was starting to annoy Keisha. For him, clutter was a part of life. Previously, when he was successful, he always had a housekeeper who kept things clean, so he didn't have the habit of cleaning up after himself at all. It seemed to him that it didn't matter, that his love for Keisha would cover any little things, like scattered socks or untidy dishes. But Keisha began to notice every detail, every little thing, and they irritated her more and more. At first she was silent, trying to calm herself down. Well, it's Marcus, he's been through so much. I can't blame him for that, she thought, forcing herself to smile when she saw him throw his shirt on the chair once again. But gradually her patience began to run out. Keisha often came home tired after work. She continued to help those who were in trouble, listened to their stories, gave advice, and tried to support everyone who needed her help. Her work absorbed her completely. And when she came home, all she wanted was peace and quiet. But instead she saw the mess and felt that her personal space had disappeared. And one evening, when she returned home later than usual, after a particularly difficult day, her patience snapped. She went into the apartment and immediately came across Marcus's shoes lying right in the middle of the hallway. His jacket was lying nearby, which seemed to have been thrown there on purpose to test her nerves for strength. Something exploded inside Keisha.
Marcus. Marcus.
Keisha went into the living room, where he was sitting on the couch, engrossed in some video on his phone. He looked up, saw her face, and immediately felt that something was wrong. Marcus, what happened?
What happened? Are you serious? Is that what you're asking?
She pointed at the scattered things.
It's just shoes, Keisha. Don't get so worked up.
Shouldn't you get turned on? Do you even see what's going on? You live here as if you don't have any responsibility.
Marcus, realizing that it wasn't the shoes, but the accumulated irritation, tried to justify himself.
I didn't have time to clean up. It doesn't mean that I don't care. I get tired at work, just like you.
Are you tired? But it's hard for me too. And when I come home, I don't want to stumble into a mess, as if it's not our house, but a garbage dump.
She turned around and went into the bedroom, closing the door loudly behind her. She needed to be alone to process her feelings. A storm was raging inside her. She was hurt. She couldn't understand how their honeymoon had turned into a series of annoyances and discontent. Meanwhile, Marcus remained sitting on the couch. He stared into the void, trying to digest what had happened. He knew Keisha was right, but at the same time it was hard for him to admit that he had really overlooked something important. For him, this marriage was a new beginning, a second chance at life, and he didn't want to believe that such little things could ruin their happiness. Deep down, he was afraid. He was afraid that after everything they had gone through together, after all the difficulties they had gone through, it would be the little things of everyday life that would cause their discord. But he also understood that he had to change something. He needed to become more attentive, more responsible. Several hours have passed. Keisha was still in the bedroom. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and thought about how everything had changed since they started living together. She did not expect that the marriage would be so difficult. Of course, they loved each other, But love did not solve all problems. She wanted to go back to the days when everything was simple and easy, when every morning started with a smile, and not with thoughts of where to find a place for another Marcus shirt. Keisha knew that he wasn't the only one with a problem. She has changed herself. Since the wedding, her expectations have become higher. She wanted their life to be perfect, like in those fairy tales she heard as a child. But the reality turned out to be different, and it upset her. When Marcus finally knocked on the bedroom door, Keisha didn't immediately answer. She continued to lie in silence, not knowing what to say to him. But Marcus did not wait for an invitation. He quietly entered and sat on the edge of the bed.
I understand that you're angry, and so am I. I was wrong. I really need to try harder. But understand, it's hard for me too.
Keisha stood up, leaning on a pillow, and looked at him.
I just need you to be more attentive. I'm tired of all this chaos.
Marcus nodded.
I'll try. Truth.
These words sounded sincere, and although Keisha was still annoyed, she understood that this was a step forward. He was willing to listen and change for her, for both of them. A few more weeks have passed. They began to learn to live together for real, not hiding their feelings and problems, but discussing them. Marcus tried to help more around the house, and Keisha learned not to react to small things with such acuteness. It wasn't easy, but they both knew that this period was an important part of their life together. They were learning how to live together in the real world, where the honeymoon ends and real life begins. It's been a few months since Keisha and Marcus started getting used to each other. All their domestic problems gradually smoothed out, and they were able to find a compromise. At some point in their lives, there was a calmness that could be called stability. But this calmness turned out to be deceptive. Where one problem is solved, a new one always appears. So it happened in their case. Marcus, from the first days of his marriage, aspired to become the person he had always been before his failures, to return to his former success, to that sense of confidence and pride in himself that disappeared with his past life. For him, work was not just a way to make a living, it was a way to prove to himself that he was back at the top, that he had not only recovered, but also become a better person. And when he had the opportunity to move to a higher position, he jumped at it without a doubt. Keisha was happy for him. She had supported Marcus from the very beginning of their relationship, inspired him when he doubted himself, and was proud of how he was able to rise up after all his past defeats. But as Marcus's career grew, so did his obligations. The new job required more time, more effort, and most frustratingly, more of his absence from home. In the beginning, everything seemed quite manageable. Marcus still got up in the morning, went to work, and returned in the evening, but now his return home was accompanied by fatigue that he could not hide. His thoughts often stayed in the office, even when he was with Keisha. Gradually, dinners together became more and more rare, and conversations about something personal became more and more superficial. It all came down to discussing his work, her work, the news of the day. And that was it. No depth, no spark that once connected them. Keisha felt it first. She began to notice that despite Marcus's physical presence, his thoughts and emotions were somewhere far away in the world of his work and new ambitions. At first, she tried to ignore it, convincing herself that it was all temporary, that when Marcus settled into his new position, everything would return to normal. But every day it became more and more obvious that it was impossible to return to the old. Marcus was immersed in his work with his head. He started staying in the office longer, often coming home late at night. Sometimes he didn't have time for dinner at all, and Keisha ate alone, looking at the empty chair opposite. She tried to keep the house in order, tried to be an attentive and caring wife, but anxiety and discontent began to accumulate inside her. Her husband was gradually disappearing from her life, although physically he was still there. One day, when Marcus stayed at work until midnight again, Keisha was sitting on the couch looking at family photos. On one of them, they stood hugging each other, with beaming smiles on their faces, shortly after the wedding. This photo was taken on their first vacation together, when it seemed that everything would be easy and simple, that love is all that is needed for happiness. But now those smiles seemed distant and almost alien. When Marcus finally returned home, she was sitting in the dark living room, lit only by the phone screen. He entered quietly, trying not to make any noise, but Keisha heard his footsteps and looked up.
I'm sorry I'm late. Today was a hell of a day.
Keisha didn't answer right away. She sighed and turned off the phone.
You're always late.
Marcus was a little confused, not expecting such an answer.
I know. But I have to work. We've talked about this.
We talked about you finding a balance, that you won't let work consume you.
It's just temporary. I haven't settled into my new position yet. There are too many things to do.
Keisha shook her head.
You've been saying that for months now. Meanwhile, I feel like I'm losing you.
Marcus was silent. He knew there was truth in what she was saying, but he couldn't afford to admit it completely. For him, this job was everything. It was a chance to regain what he had lost, a chance to become who he once was. He couldn't afford to back down.
I'm doing this for us.
Keisha smiled bitterly.
But it seems that everything you do is for you. I understand that work is important, but you are no longer at home. You're here physically, but I don't feel your presence.
She got up from the sofa and went to the window, looking out at the dark street behind the glass. She hadn't felt so alone in a long time, even when they had just met and were just friends. Now, as his wife, she felt that she was moving further away from him every day.
I do not know how long I can tolerate this. I don't want to be that wife who waits for her husband late every night, not knowing if he will come on time. I don't want to be a woman whose life revolves around someone's career.
These words startled Marcus. He realized that he was too focused on his ambitions, on trying to regain his former glory and success, and completely lost sight of the most important thing, his wife. She, who had always been there for him, supported him in the most difficult moments, now felt forgotten and unnecessary.
I didn't want it to happen like this.
But it worked.
The next few weeks were difficult for them. Marcus tried to change his schedule by spending more time at home, but the stress at work kept him from relaxing. Every time he thought he could leave on time, a new problem arose that required his intervention. And Keisha became more and more withdrawn into herself. She was trying to do something of her own. At some point, Keisha began to devote more time to her own ambitions. Her work at the charity has always been important to her, but now she's thinking about how to make it more meaningful. She wanted more than just to be a part of someone else's project. She started dreaming about her own foundation, about how she could help people more effectively by doing things her own way. This idea grew in her more and more every day. Keisha realized that she couldn't just sit and wait for Marcus to find a balance between work and home. She needed something of her own, something that would bring her joy and satisfaction. So she started preparing to create her own project. It wasn't easy. She had worked for many years under the guidance of others. And now, having decided on her own business, she realized how many obstacles were in front of her. She worked in the evenings, looked through documents, and drew up a business plan. Keisha spent more and more time at the computer, discussing her ideas with colleagues and old acquaintances from charity circles. Her house became an office, and her life became a series of meetings and negotiations. She found something that gave her a sense of purpose, and that feeling seemed to compensate for her loneliness in her marriage. Marcus noticed that she was busy, but he was so immersed in his work that he didn't pay attention to it. It seemed to him that if Keisha found something that fascinated her, it was good. He did not understand that her new activity was not only a way for her to realize herself, but also an escape from their crumbling relationship. One evening, when they were sitting at dinner again in almost silence, Keisha looked up at Marcus. She wanted to talk, to tell him about her ideas and plans, but something stopped her. He was sitting looking at his phone, answering some work messages. She suddenly realized that this had become their new normal, two people who live together, but communicate less and less. Her disappointment became a heavy burden that she could no longer ignore.
Marcus, we need to talk.
Marcus looked up from the phone, surprised by her serious tone.
About what?
About us. We are moving away from each other. I feel like we've lost something important.
Marcus wanted to object, but realized she was right. He sighed and put the phone aside.
I feel it too, but I do not know how to fix it.
I'm not asking you to fix everything, but we have to try. We need to devote more time to each other, not just to work.
Marcus nodded, realizing that this was the moment of truth. It's been a few months since Marcus threw himself into his new job. Keisha, although she supported him, understood that their relationship was not what it used to be. She couldn't pinpoint exactly when the turning point occurred, but deep down she knew their lives had changed, and not for the better. Every day, Keisha went to work at her charity organization, as before. Everything was the same there, the same people, the same stories, the same problems. Her day began with listening to complaints, listening to requests, finding solutions for those in need, directing them to sources of help, and monitoring the implementation of projects. All this gave her satisfaction. She always knew that her job was important. But here's the problem: she didn't feel useful anymore. The job she had once adored now seemed like a chore to her. Previously, every day was a challenge filled with a sense of significance, and that she was making the world a better place. Now it has turned into an endless stream of monotonous tasks, as if on a conveyor belt. The same faces, the same problems. She listened to people's stories, but increasingly her attention began to wander. She heard, but she wasn't listening anymore. Her inner sense of satisfaction was gradually disappearing, and in its place came a feeling of emptiness. This feeling of disappointment began to grow inside her. Previously, Keisha had always been proud that her work helped people. She was the one who could help in the most difficult moment, and it made her life meaningful. But now her work no longer aroused the same emotions in her. She was trapped between duty and lack of joy. The daily chores that used to inspire her now seemed like a chore. Every morning when she came to the office, she forced herself to smile at colleagues and clients. She understood that outwardly everything looked the same, as always her attention to detail, caring for everyone in need, all this remained in place. But something else was going on inside her. She felt her heart gradually moving away from this work. And then one morning, sitting at her desk, Keisha suddenly realized that she had lost motivation. She was looking at the documents in front of her, but her thoughts were somewhere far away. All these years, she has been helping other people, trying to make their lives better, and that was her mission. But what about her own life? She gave her all, leaving nothing for herself. Where was she in this? Who was Keisha outside of her job and relationship with Marcus? These questions began to haunt her. Every day they returned to her, increasing her inner anxiety. Keisha understood that her life was locked in two aspects: her job and her marriage. And none of them brought her joy anymore. Her own desires and aspirations were left in the background. But what kind of desires were they? What did she want? Keisha had never really asked herself that question. She recalled her youthful dreams. Once upon a time, she dreamed of changing the world, doing something significant, memorable. At that time, charity seemed to her the ideal way to do this. She believed that she could change people's lives, help them find their place in the world. But now that faith has been shaken, no matter how hard she tried, people's problems remained the same. Has she really changed a lot in all this time? Or were her efforts simply dissolving into a sea of human suffering? Keisha started asking herself more and more questions. She realized that she could no longer continue in the same spirit as before. Her inner world demanded a change. She needed to find a new meaning, a new purpose. But how to do it? Where can I look for answers? These thoughts began to take over her mind more and more often. Her days were spent thinking about what she could have done differently. She was thinking about her future. Could she continue to work for charity if she no longer felt connected to it? Or did she need to radically change the direction of her life? Marcus was too busy with his career to notice what was going on with Keisha. She understood that she could not count on his support in these matters. He was focused on his job, on his ambitions. Their marriage became more and more formal, and Keisha increasingly felt lonely even in his presence. She tried not to blame him for that. He was just like that, a man who was looking to restore his former life through success. But she realized that she could no longer live for the sake of other people's goals. These internal torments led her to the idea that she had to create something. She began to think about starting her own business. It could have been the charitable foundation she had always dreamed of founding. She wanted a more flexible and independent structure that would allow her to implement her ideas without the restrictions imposed by working in someone else's organization. The thought of it haunted her. Keisha began to explore the possibilities of creating her own charitable foundation. She was thinking about what he could be like, how he would work. She was inspired for the first time in a long time. She felt that she could find a new meaning. She imagined how she could develop assistance programs that would match her ideals. Keisha saw how she could change the approach to charity, make it more personal, more focused on the individual needs of people, rather than on mass support. But with that inspiration came doubts. She was asking herself questions: will she be able to cope? Does she have enough experience? Is she ready to leave her comfort zone and start from scratch? Her frightening uncertainty stood in the way of realizing her plans. Keisha didn't know if she had the strength and determination to take this step. Her fears were well-founded. Her job was stable, and she couldn't just walk away from there. After all, that would mean giving up everything she had worked for so many years. And how would her colleagues and superiors react to her decision? But on the other hand, she couldn't stay where she was, feeling unhappy and unfulfilled, either. Every morning, Keisha got out of bed with the same feeling of insecurity. She was moving slowly along her usual schedule, but her thoughts were focused on the future. She was thinking about what her new business could be like, what steps needed to be taken to make it a reality. Plans, ideas, concepts were spinning in her head, but she was still afraid to take the first step. Over time, her internal conflict became more acute. Keisha understood that if she didn't change something in her life, she would simply die of inner disappointment. Her old passion for life and work was on the verge of disappearing. And that scared her the most. But even more terrifying was the thought that she would not be able to cope, that her ideas would remain just ideas, that she would not be able to make her dreams come true. This fear was like a shadow following her everywhere. He was forcing her to delay making a decision, to wait another day, another week. But the realization was growing inside her that she couldn't wait any longer. She began to wake up at night, thinking about what she needed to do. Her mind raced from one decision to another. She imagined what her own organization would look like, how it would work, how her projects would help people in a new way. But these dreams have always faced cold reality, the fear of failure, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of being left alone on this path. However, Keisha knew she needed to move forward. Her life couldn't stay in the same place anymore. The work that had once filled her with meaning no longer brought her joy. She could no longer ignore her own needs and aspirations. And then one day, at the end of a long day at work, when the office was already empty, Keisha made a decision. She will move forward. She'll make the first move, even if it's scary. She will begin to make her dreams come true, because she can no longer stand still. Her life was at a crossroads, and she chose the path of change. Keisha and Marcus never thought they could get to the point where their love would start to crack at the seams. At the very beginning of their journey, when they just started building a relationship, everything seemed clear, simple and right. But life always makes its own adjustments, and tension was building up between them every day. Their warm bond, which seemed unbreakable, began to weaken under the pressure of everyday worries, ambitions and internal contradictions. Time has passed, and those minor irritants that were once easily forgiven have now become a real problem. Previously, when Marcus was late at work, Keisha could turn a blind eye to it, thinking that it was temporary, that it was just a phase. But now his constant absences have become the norm. Their evenings together, when they discussed their dreams and plans, have now given way to silence. More and more often, Keisha dined alone, her thoughts plunged into a void that she could no longer ignore. Marcus, in turn, felt increasingly detached. He was absorbed in his career, his achievements, which finally began to bear fruit. It seemed to him that he was doing everything right, he was working for the future, he was trying for both of them. But deep down, he knew that something was slipping away. He noticed changes in Keisha. Her looks became colder, and the smile that once illuminated his days became a rarity. This tension accumulated slowly, like water filling a vessel. None of them wanted to admit to themselves that something was going wrong. They both tried to maintain a semblance of normality, avoiding serious conversations that could lead to conflict. But no matter how hard they tried, the truth began to show through the thin shell of their marriage. Keisha spent more and more time alone. Her project to create her own charitable foundation was progressing, but it was more like running away than striving to realize a dream. She saw it as an opportunity to escape from reality, from the loneliness that was slowly but surely filling her heart. Every new meeting, every new step to create her foundation seemed to her a chance to start all over again, not only in work, but also in life. But the more she went into work, the more she felt a void that no amount of professional success could fill. Marcus wasn't happy either. Yes, his career began to take off, but every day he felt more and more lonely. He understood that his relationship with Keisha had changed, but he couldn't figure out how and why it happened. It seemed to him that everything he was doing was for the sake of their common future. But then why did he feel that this future was becoming more and more hazy? One evening, when Keisha returned home late, exhausted after a long day of meetings and discussions, she discovered that Marcus was not at home again. It wasn't the first time lately, and before, she would have just ignored it, busied herself with work or just rested alone. But this time, something inside her snapped. Her patience, which had been tested by time, could no longer stand it. She stood in the empty living room, feeling a dull rage building inside her. It seemed to her that this house, which had once been their common place of comfort and safety, had turned into an empty shell. They lived here, but it was like two parallel worlds. Keisha no longer felt connected to Marcus, and this realization brought her unbearable pain. When Marcus returned, late at night, he was exhausted, as always. His thoughts were on work, on the tasks he had not completed, and on what he had to do the next day. But when he entered the house, he immediately felt the tension in the air. It was almost a physical sensation, as if the air had become heavier. He knew something was wrong, but he wasn't ready for what was going on inside Keisha. Keisha was standing in the kitchen, not touching her dinner. Her thoughts were clouded by anger and disappointment. She could no longer hide what was accumulating inside her. It seemed to her that she could no longer wait for something to change. All those moments when she felt forgotten, lonely, and unnecessary flashed through her mind. It seemed to her that her life no longer belonged to herself, that she had dissolved into routine, into other people's ambitions, in anticipation of something that would never happen. Marcus entered the kitchen, saw her tense figure, and realized that this evening would not be the same as usual. Something had to happen. They could no longer ignore what had been smoldering between them for a long time. Keisha felt a wave of emotions boiling inside her. She couldn't keep quiet anymore, couldn't hide her feelings anymore. It hurt her that their life had become the way it was now. Her heart ached at the thought that they had once been happy, but now it all seemed far away and out of reach. She could no longer live in this state, in a state of constant expectation that everything would work out by itself. Marcus, feeling tense, started thinking about how to fix the situation, but his thoughts were chaotic. He didn't understand what exactly went wrong. It seemed to him that he was doing everything possible to ensure their future, but then why was Keisha so unhappy? Why wasn't she smiling at him like she used to? It seemed to him that he was losing her, but he did not know how to hold on to what had already begun to crumble. And so when Keisha's emotions reached the limit, an explosion occurred. She couldn't keep everything to herself anymore. All the accumulated pain, resentment, disappointment poured out. It was like a storm that had been gathering for a long time, and now broke out with such force that Marcus was caught off guard. Her accusations, her pain, her words hit him like blows. He didn't know how to react, how to protect himself from this flood of emotions. His first reaction was to defend himself, to find excuses, to explain that he was doing everything for their common good. But deep down, he understood it won't help. Their problems went deeper than just fatigue or work. It was something more, something that both of them had overlooked. Keisha felt that she had finally said something that had been gnawing at her for a long time. But instead of relief, she felt only an even greater emptiness. She realized that words could not fix what had been destroyed. Her pain was too deep to just disappear after she vented her emotions. She understood that their problems would not be solved overnight, that there were still many trials ahead of them. Marcus was stunned. He stood in front of her, feeling helpless. Everything he thought was right now seemed like a mistake to him. He understood that he had missed the moment when he could have changed something, when he could have prevented this crisis. But now that everything had already happened, he didn't know how to take it all back. Their quarrel became a point of no return. This was the first time they had faced such a strong conflict, when their feelings had spilled out with such force. But with that came the realization that they could no longer ignore their problems. Their relationship was on the edge of a precipice, and it only depended on them whether they could find a way back or everything would collapse completely. Keisha went to her room, leaving Marcus alone. Her thoughts were full of bitterness and disappointment. She didn't know how they had come to this point, but she knew one thing: it couldn't go on like this. Her life, her dreams, her feelings were all under threat, and she could no longer live in expectation that someone else would solve her problems. Marcus remained standing in the kitchen, feeling lost. He knew he had to say something, do something to fix the situation. But there was an emptiness inside him, and he couldn't find the words. Everything he thought was important now seemed insignificant. His work, his achievements, all this paled before the fact that he could lose the most precious thing in his life. And that night, when both were left alone with their thoughts, they realized that they were facing a choice. Either they start working on themselves and their relationship, or their marriage will collapse. After that tense night when the quarrel had shaken them both to the core, the silence that enveloped the house seemed even more frightening. A silence that did not bring relief, but only emphasized how far they had moved away from each other. And if earlier there was an invisible wall of petty resentments and misunderstandings between them, now this wall has become real, tangible. They could physically feel her presence. They both understood that they could no longer ignore the problems. They could not dismiss what had been accumulating inside for years. Now it had all come out, and they had to decide what to do next. Keisha couldn't calmly think about what had happened. The quarrel was the culmination of everything she had been carrying for so long. Every moment, every little thing that had seemed insignificant before, now surfaced in her memory with renewed vigor. She couldn't forget how lonely she felt, even when Marcus was around. The memory of those evenings when she waited for him at home, hoping that today they could just talk, still burned her. But he came in late, exhausted from work, and they didn't even have time for simple conversations. Their life together no longer brought her joy. Her inner voice told her that she deserved real partnership, real intimacy. But did they have the opportunity to return it? Marcus, in turn, was experiencing his own inner struggle. He couldn't believe that they had reached such a point. In his mind, everything was different. He was working to ensure that they both had a good future, so that they could live better than before. He always believed that he was doing everything right, achieving success, growing in his career. But the more he delved into his work, the more he moved away from real life, from Keisha. He only realized this now that he saw her pain, which she had been hiding for so long. For Marcus, this moment was a revelation. He has always considered himself a strong, purposeful man who knows how to cope with difficulties. But that evening he realized that his strength was not helping him in a relationship. His single-mindedness in his career has become his weakness in marriage. He had put his ambitions above their relationship, above her needs, and only now realized how much he had hurt her. It seemed to him that he had betrayed her trust, her love, because he could not understand her pain. And now the question arose in front of him what to do next. Did they have a chance to rebuild what was destroyed? The following days passed in silence. Both were trying to cope with their emotions, to think about everything that had happened. It wasn't easy. Keisha went to work with a heavy heart, and every morning she felt something in her shrink at the thought of what would happen in the evening. Her life was no longer the same as before. Her own ambitions, her dreams of a charitable foundation, which until recently seemed so important, have now faded against the background of their family problems. All she wanted was to regain the sense of closeness and support that they had once shared. But she didn't know how to do it. Marcus, on the other hand, was also deep in thought. His work, which used to be the meaning of his existence, now seemed meaningless to him. He couldn't concentrate on the tasks anymore. His thoughts kept returning to Keisha. It seemed to him that if he didn't change something in their relationship now, he would lose her forever. But how do I find the right words? How do I start a conversation that could get them back on the right track? These questions haunted him. Eventually, after several days of silence, the tension between them reached a critical point. They both knew they couldn't avoid talking anymore. Keisha came home after work. Her thoughts were heavy and vague. She knew she had to say something, but she couldn't find the strength to start. However, Marcus couldn't wait any longer. He felt that if they didn't talk now, there wouldn't be a chance anymore. When they finally sat down together, the silence between them seemed louder than any conversation. It was something they both feared, but they knew it was necessary. They didn't know where to start, but they knew that this conversation would be crucial. Marcus was the first to think that he had lost his ability to listen. Once he could sit with Keisha for hours, just discussing her feelings, her thoughts. But now he realized that he had stopped doing it. He stopped being the person for her to share her feelings with. He focused on his work, believing that it was important for their common future, but did not realize that the most important thing was their present, their bond, their relationship. Keisha, in turn, realized that her fears and frustrations had accumulated due to the fact that she herself had also become distant. She believed that if she waited patiently, Marcus would figure out what she needed. But she couldn't expect him to guess her thoughts. Her silence was as devastating as his absence. She realized that instead of talking about her feelings, she was storing them up inside, and this only increased the tension. When they started discussing their feelings, it wasn't an easy conversation. Both understood that their problems were deeper than it seemed at first glance. Keisha felt betrayed, but at the same time realized that her own expectations and fears also played a role in their separation. Marcus, in turn, saw how his ambition and pursuit of success made him blind to what was going on in their marriage. They both realized that their problems could not be solved overnight. But the most important thing that became clear was that they were both ready to work on it. Keisha, despite her pain, realized that she still loves Marcus. She couldn't just let him go because their love was still alive, even though it had suffered a lot. She was ready to work on their relationship, but she needed to see that Marcus was also ready to change. Marcus realized that he needed to rethink his priorities. His career could no longer come first, because if he lost Keisha, no amount of success at work would be able to compensate for that loss. He was ready to take a step back to rebuild what had collapsed. He needed to show Keisha that he was ready to listen, that he was ready to be a real partner for her, and not just a person who comes home late and brings fatigue and irritation with him. And so, as they talked, they began to make a plan. Not a plan that would include some grandiose changes or promises, but a simple plan how to return intimacy, how to return understanding. They both agreed that it was necessary to start small. Marcus decided that he would try to come home earlier so that he could spend more time with Keisha. Keisha, in turn, decided that it would be more honest to talk about her feelings without waiting for them to accumulate to an explosive state. They understood that it would be a long journey. Their trust has been undermined, their bond weakened, but they were still together, and it gave them hope. Both realized that love is not just a feeling, but a job. A job that needs to be done every day, regardless of fatigue or stress. And now they were ready to start this work again. The next few weeks were a period of gradual recovery for them. They began to spend more time with each other, discussing not only their work, but also their feelings, their dreams. Marcus gradually reduced his immersion in his career, finding time for his personal life. Keisha, in turn, began to think more about how to maintain a balance between her ambitions and their relationship. This process has not been easy. Both of them were still struggling with their inner demons. Keisha continued to feel fear that her dreams might remain unfulfilled, and Marcus was still under pressure at work. But now they were on the same side. Now they knew that they could discuss their problems and find solutions together, not alone. They started going out more in the evenings, as they used to do when they first started dating. These walks became a time for them when they could talk without interruptions, without fuss. Gradually, their conversations became more open, more sincere. They talked not only about what bothered them, but also about what brought joy. It became their way of restoring lost intimacy. And although the problems hadn't completely disappeared, they now had the confidence that they could handle them together. Rebuilding a relationship after a crisis is always a difficult and slow process. Keisha and Marcus knew that they had a long way to go, and that nothing would change quickly. But they also realized that the main thing was their willingness to work on themselves and their relationships. The love that had once united them still lived in their hearts, although it was weakened by pain, misunderstanding, and accumulated resentments. It was important not to forget what they had started this journey for, and now they were ready to start a new chapter in their lives. The first step towards recovery was the realization that every decision, every act, every action in their marriage matters. These were not some great gestures or grand promises, but little things that added up to everyday life. Keisha and Marcus have started to pay more attention to how they relate to each other. Every morning now began not just with a quick good morning, but real attention to each other. They began to take small but important steps to regain the warmth that once bound them. Keisha no longer expected Marcus to figure out what was happening to her on his own. She has learned to express her feelings and desires directly, without fear of being misunderstood or rejected. It was important not to hide your emotions, but to share them, even if it was difficult. It was a lesson she had learned after their serious conversation. Now she tried to talk about what was bothering her before the little things turned into big problems. Her willingness to open dialogue was the key to the new relationship they were building together. Marcus, in turn, realized that his job is not the only important thing in his life. He used to think that his career achievements could compensate for everything else, that if he succeeded, he would automatically make them both happy. But now he understood that success at work cannot replace intimacy and understanding in a relationship. He learned how to balance work and personal life, finding time for Keisha and for himself. It wasn't easy, especially in the first weeks, when old habits kept coming back. But Marcus was determined to change his attitude, and it was evident in his every action. Their lives have become more measured. There were no more constant stresses associated with the fact that one of them was absorbed in his own affairs, and the other felt forgotten. They began to find joy in simple things, watching movies together, cooking dinners, walking in the park. These moments have become more than just a pastime for them. It was their way of reminding each other that they were important, that their bond was still alive. Keisha, continuing to develop her charity foundation project, found in this not only professional satisfaction, but also a way to restore her inner harmony. She realized that her desire to help others is part of her essence, but she must not forget about herself. The creation of the foundation gave her the opportunity to control her time and energy, which helped to maintain a balance between work and personal life. Her ambitions no longer seemed like something that threatened her relationship with Marcus. On the contrary, she realized that she could be successful and at the same time happy in marriage. Marcus, in turn, reconsidered his attitude to success. He no longer aspired to career heights at any cost. His priorities have changed. Now it was important for him not just to seek new positions or large incomes, but to find meaning in what he was doing and maintain intimacy with Keisha. His work was still an important part of his life, but now it did not occupy all his time and thoughts. He learned to let go of control, to allow himself to be imperfect, and this gave him a sense of inner peace. They started traveling more. Traveling has become a way for them not only to see new places, but also to get closer, get away from the daily routine and rediscover each other. They planned their trips together, chose destinations, and discussed what they wanted to see and experience. It became a new tradition that filled their lives with joy and inspiration. Keisha and Marcus were able to feel again that they are a team that can overcome any difficulties. During their travels, they found time for long walks, during which they discussed their plans for the future. Keisha shared her ideas on how to develop her charitable foundation, and Marcus talked about how he sees his professional future without those ambitions that once obscured everything else for him. These conversations helped them understand each other better, making their relationship deeper. Keisha has learned to let go of her pursuit of perfectionism. Previously, she always wanted everything to be perfect, both at work and in her personal life. But now she has realized that the ideal is a myth, and that it is important to accept yourself and your life as they are. She realized that her relationship with Marcus couldn't be perfect, but that didn't make it any less valuable. She stopped demanding things from herself and Marcus that were impossible to achieve, and it brought her inner relief. Marcus has also learned to let go of expectations. He stopped trying to keep everything in his life under control. Now he knew that sometimes you just have to let things take their course, not try to control every little thing. This freedom gave him the opportunity to feel more relaxed and satisfied. He no longer worried about the fact that he might not always be the perfect husband or a successful professional. He accepted his weaknesses, and it made him stronger. Their new chapter in life was not about achieving the ideal, but about accepting imperfections and learning to love each other despite them. They no longer expected their relationship to be perfect, like in movies or books. Now they understood that real love is about daily work, understanding, acceptance, and willingness to support each other in difficult moments. Keisha no longer felt the loneliness that had haunted her for so long. She no longer felt forgotten or unwanted. Now she knew that Marcus was really there, that he could hear her, see her, support her. This gave her confidence not only in the relationship but also in herself. She has learned to value herself and her achievements without seeking approval from the outside. Her charitable foundation had become a source of inspiration for her, but now she didn't let her work completely consume her. She found the balance she had been looking for a long time. Marcus, in turn, felt that he was no longer running after a phantom success. He found what really mattered to him: the closeness with Keisha, their joint plans for the future, their travels, their conversations. His life no longer seemed to him like a race for achievements, but became a journey full of discoveries and joys. He stopped comparing himself with others, stopped striving to prove something to someone. Now he knew that the most important thing was to live in the moment, be with those he loves, and enjoy what he already has. A sense of comfort and security reigned in their house again. Now it was not just a place where they lived together, but also their common space in which they built their lives. Marcus began to help more around the house, paying attention to those things that previously seemed unimportant to him. Keisha, in turn, began to appreciate their moments together more, realizing that every day is an opportunity to make their relationship even stronger. Their marriage had been through serious trials, but now they felt stronger. They realized that love is not just a feeling that comes and goes, but a conscious choice that needs to be made every day. They chose each other and were ready to work on their relationship, no matter what difficulties might arise in the future. This new chapter in their lives was full of hope and confidence. Keisha and Marcus knew that new challenges lay ahead, but now they were ready to face them together. They were not only husband and wife, but also partners who supported each other in every aspect of life. And although their path was far from ideal, they learned to appreciate it for what it is. Now their lives had become more fulfilling, more meaningful. They both changed during the time they spent together, and these changes made their bond even stronger. Every morning they woke up with the confidence that, despite all the difficulties they had gone through, they could overcome any new challenges. Now they knew that together they were capable of anything. Their new chapter was just beginning,